I was wrong again, people, and I'm so happy about that. I didn't think that Fingerlab would pick up an app that is over a decade old and actually revitalize it, rewrite it, and make a new app, but they did. This is Musyc 2. It works exactly like Musyc 1. However, there are two major changes to it. Number one, it supports MIDI out, and that is something we've been asking for over a decade. And secondly, it now also supports AUV3. On top of that, there is also a quality of life improvement here because we can now also export the projects that we make inside Musyc, meaning we can now actually build a patch base for Musyc and share our patches with each other. Now, the sad thing here is that we don't get to import our old original Musyc projects into Musyc 2 because the original Musyc doesn't support exporting projects. It's a damn shame. Now, we also have a visual upgrade in the form of skins, and if we go up into the cogwheel menu and look down here where it says skin, we have the classical look, we have the black and white look, and we had both of these in the original Musyc. But now we also have Phantom, which makes things look as if they were drawn with a pen, and we also have something called Pastel. And Fingerlab, listen up here. I love that you put this in here, and I hope we get more. I want a neon skin, and how about a grayscale skin? And another thing, I want there to be some other elements that we can draw. Right now we can only draw lines, right? But we can't do anything with them. How about you let us bend them? Well, there you go. Those are the upgrades for the new Musyc 2, and everything else pretty much works exactly like it does in the original Musyc. So for those of you who bought the old app and you want that upgrade, go get it now. I highly recommend it. Now, for everyone else who haven't been convinced yet, or maybe you just want to know more about Musyc, or you just want a refresher, stick around because I'm going to dig into this highly generative physics-based MIDI sequencer where we can also make art. Now, Musyc 2 supports being loaded on iPad, iPhone, and I think also Apple Watch. I'm not sure, you'll have to double check that. However, it will look a little bit different depending on if you're running Musyc 2 as a standalone app or if you're running it as an AUV3. But in any case, all of the versions functions exactly the same except from one thing. You see, the playback will be locked to the host when you're using Musyc as an AUV3. So nothing will play unless the timeline is also running. Oh, and by the way, there are two AUV3 versions of Musyc 2. You can load it as an instrument with its internal sound engine, which is sample-based, and this version of Musyc 2 still has MIDI out capabilities. However, if you don't want to waste resources, then I suggest you load Musyc 2 as a MIDI-only plugin into a MIDI FX slot. Now, as soon as you load Musyc 2 into an AUV3 host or a DAW, it will expose its MIDI out ports, and it will have 4 of them. Now, these 4 MIDI out channels will output MIDI notes for 4 specific elements, and I'm talking about the circle, square, triangle, and rectangle. Now, these elements will all generate a trigger that will trigger a note whenever they collide with another object. Now, you can send that MIDI note data to whatever type of instrument you want that can receive MIDI note data. It's the same type of data that an instrument receives when you are playing a MIDI keyboard. So, nothing weird here. And yes, for those of you who might be beginners, you can send this MIDI note data out to hardware too, as long as you have a MIDI USB interface. Here I'm sending out notes from Musyc into my iK Multimedia UnoSynth Pro X. And if you have a MIDI to CV interface, well, you can then also sequence semi-modular synthesizers or Eurorack systems with Musyc too. Now, when it comes to MIDI CC, well, Musyc doesn't generate any MIDI CC data, so there's no way of actually getting it to control a mixer or anything like that. It's a full-on musical sequencer. Now, Musyc 2 can, however, receive MIDI CC data, and so you can control it with MIDI controllers and stuff. However, right now, as I'm recording this, for the AUV3 version, there is no way of actually setting this behavior up, because the MIDI settings for setting up MIDI CC, well, they're only inside of the standalone app. So if you do want to set this up, make sure you have a MIDI controller connected to your iPad And then we just go to the MIDI settings, we go and turn on the MIDI input, we can select our controller right here, and then after that we can go to MIDI mapping, and here it pretty much works like a MIDI learn system. So to map something, you simply tap on it and it will put itself in a waiting mode, and then all you have to do is to tweak a knob, slide a fader, or press a button, and it's mapped to that function. And you get some nice features in here. With one hand, you can draw and put in elements inside your project, and with the other hand, you can get precise control with the MIDI controller over muting, volume, pitch, and stuff that you find inside the mixer. There are no CC controls for changing stuff within an object or within an element, but you do have some really sweet controls like speed, gravity, tempo, and you can even change the skin. So what you see in front of you are the 13 different elements or objects that you will be working with inside Musyc 2. Now, I'm going to start by zooming out of here to show you the size of the actual canvas we can work with. And that's pretty much it. So it's pretty big and there is a lot of space to work with, but there is actually a limit to how many notes can be on screen at the same time. And when you have too many of them, well, then notes will start to disappear. Oh, and when I say notes, I actually mean sound objects. And speaking about sound, let's have a look at note generation first. So if we zoom back in here, we can take a look at the first 4 objects. These are the sound objects, and so these 3 are melody objects, and this one is a rhythm or drum object. Now these have physics and will be affected by gravity. They will bounce whenever they hit an object, and when they hit an object, they will also generate a trigger that will generate a note. Now the pitch and octave of that note will be decided horizontally. Alright, so there are 3 octaves available and they're pretty much laid out like this. And the notes generated will be set to a specific scale. That scale can be set with the scale object. Whenever you start a new project, it will automatically be set to a pentagonic minor scale in the key of C. Now you can change this by adding the scale object to your project and then tapping on the scale object and then changing the scale by tapping down here and sliding around until you have the scale and root key that you want and then pressing submit. Now the cool thing with this though is that you can actually make a sequence of scales because you can have up to 4 different scales and 4 different root keys in here. And all you have to do is to go back into the scale object and then just add the scale by pressing the plus sign, setting whatever scale and root key you want, and then doing that up to 4 times. And the way that you get it to actually switch the scale is by either recording an animation for the scale object or by just letting it move around by itself based upon the physics inside Musyc 2. Now, if you only want to use one scale and one root key, you can also just make it static. There is no need for it to move around if you're using the same scale and key. So all of the objects have a properties menu where you can edit their properties. And all you have to do is to tap an object and their properties menu will pop up in the lower edge of the screen. Now this menu will look different depending on what object you're working with because they all have different functions, but most of them have this static function right here, and all you have to do is to highlight it to make it a static object, meaning it's no longer affected by the physics engine inside Musyc 2. And remember, whenever you're working within Musyc 2, you're not just making a MIDI sequence or music, you're also doing art. So you don't have to place certain objects that don't need to be visible in the visible area. You can place them away from where the action is going, or you could put the action away from where the art is. Just have a quick look at this. This looks pretty cool, right? It took some time to make, I'll tell you that. But none of what you're seeing here is actually making the music. No, if we zoom out and go to the right side here, here is where the music is being made. Alright, so back to note generation, because we're still not done. You see, there is a sequence object in here, and it's this one. Its job is to spit out sound objects based on a sequence. And if we open up its properties, we can see the sequence right here. It's a 16-note sequence, and whenever it's playing through here and the playhead hits a highlighted box, it will spit out a sound object. Now, the type of sound object that it spits out can be decided right down here. And if we just tap here, we can cycle through the different sound objects we want to spit out. Now, one thing to add here is that sound objects of the same species will not collide with themselves, but they will collide with anything that is static, and they will also collide with other sound objects. And when they do that, they trigger sounds or MIDI notes. Now, before we jump to the next section in this video, I want to mention the fact that you can change sizes on all objects. If you just select one, so you have its property menu open, then you'll have the size control right there. Now again, depending on what type of object you're selecting, well, you actually have more things that you can fiddle with, but we'll get to those in the next sections in this video. Alright, so Musyc 2 implements a physics-based engine. And if we go up into the cogwheel menu, we can find settings for overall speed, gravity, tempo for the sequencing, and also we can turn on the accelerometer, which is basically using a little piece of tech inside your iDevice that allows you to control things by tilting your device. Now, I'm not going to turn that on, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn down gravity to 0. Next, we're going to back out of the settings and we're going to add an object. And if I give it a slight nudge, you can see that it's moving very slightly, but it's not falling down because there is no gravity. So it's just floating around freely in space. If I go back into the settings and change the gravity to about 10%, we can then see how that object falls out of picture. And if we just change the gravity to 100%, go out of here, zoom out a little, add an object, you can see how quickly it falls. And this is a really nice tool to be using for your MIDI art sequences. I don't know if that's the right term, but what else are you going to call it? Now again, I just want to go back into the settings and just really highlight the fact that you have two controls that will globally control how the physics engine handles objects in your MIDI art pieces. So any little change you do in here will drastically change how everything behaves. And some of this behavior can actually be modulated, but I'll talk more about that in the modulation section of this video. Alright, so another thing we have in space are black holes, and we do have them in Musyc 2 also. Now, The only thing that these do is basically eat up anything that falls into it. So if you have a spot inside of your sequence where you keep having sound objects amass and they keep bouncing around and creating notes you don't want, well, you can just strategically place a black hole there and have it eat up all of those notes. And since we're doing this whole space thing, how about some strings theory? You see, you can actually attach objects to static things and also non-static things. So you can basically tie sound objects together and have them pull on one another as they bounce around. So if you want to get into strings theory, all you have to do is to, let's just take one of these sound objects here, make it a static one so it doesn't move, and then we take another sound object and in its property menu we just tap this icon here, and next we tap that static object, and as you can see there is a string attached to it. Now, if we swing this around, it will, depending on speed and gravity, move in certain ways. So if you change those, it will change how it moves. And if we remove gravity completely, we can have it just orbit the static object we attached it to. But that's uninteresting because it's not going to create any triggers for notes if it doesn't bounce into things. So we can strategically just place some stuff in there, like a bumper or some other static objects. Now, it would be even more fun if we could shift gravity or do something with gravity more locally, and that's exactly what the planet is for. That's what it's called, looks like this, and it basically bends gravity and also makes things orbit it like a spinning planet. So it will pull things towards it, and then as soon as things get close, it will either bounce off it and, get a bigger orbit, only to be sucked in again. And that's what happens if you only have one of these planets in here. It gets more tricky when you add more of them. Now take all of those things I just talked about and combine them into one little MIDI art project, and you can make something like this. This is a little mini solar system space thingy that I made, and I've implemented almost everything that I've talked about. And that's pretty much it, but there is one more physics altering little object in here. It's called a cross. Now, whenever something hits it, it gets flung away, and you can control the rate of spin if you go into the property menu and you go down here. You can change the rate of the spin. Now, there is one thing I wish you could do with both the cross and also the planet, and that is to change the rotational direction of the orbit and or spin of the cross. But you can't do that. I hope you're listening, Fingerlab. I would like to be able to make it go either way. All right, so I want to start with animation. So if we just add a line here, we have a little recorder button down there. Now, if I press that recorder button and I then just move around the line, I press the record again to stop recording, and then I press play, well, we can see the animation I just did over and over and over. And you can do this with any object, which is really, really dope. Next, we get into modulation, and for that we have a specific object which basically works like an LFO. And it gets really interesting depending on what you're modulating with this thing. Now, to modulate something, we just attach it to another object. All right, so here we have a modulator object and also a sound object. And the first thing I'm going to do is to select the modulator object to open its properties menu. Then we're going to go to the string thing and highlight it and then tap the sound object. And as soon as I did that, you can see that it's modulating its size. Now, if we keep the properties tab open, we can tap on where it says param size and we get mute. And here we'll basically modulate the muting function. So whenever it's muted, it will gray out the sound object. And when it's not muted, it will just have its full-on color again. Now, if we tap again, we have volume. Tap again, we have pitch. Tap again, we have length. Yeah, so 5 different parameters that you can modulate. And listen to this. We could modulate the size. We could add another modulator object and then attach another string here and then start modulating the muting function instead. Now we have the rate of the LFO right here, and we have 2 waveforms. Right now we're using a triangle waveform, and if we tap it, we have a square. And here I wish we had a little bit more waveforms, like maybe a sine, maybe a sawtooth, things like that. One thing to highlight also is that the modulator will modulate different things in different objects. And some things that I would like to be able to modulate, you can't modulate. And you'll have to discover that for yourself. But this is some pretty powerful tools to use for whatever MIDI art sequences you want to build. Now, a third thing I want to highlight is the fact that if you don't attach the modulator to anything, if we just add a modulator here, then right now it says none in the parameter. But if we tap it, we can actually get it to modulate global controls like speed, gravity, and tempo, which can create some highly irregular patches. Now, Musyc 2 is expertly crafted for creating chaos-like randomly generated melody sequences and stuff. But you can also make rhythms in here because there is a rhythm sound object, right? So how about making rhythm-locked sequences? Well, you can actually do that. And the way that you do that is by putting sequence objects right on top of lines, meaning as soon as they spit out an object, it instantly generates a note. And if you do that with all of the sequence blocks, well, then you basically have a 16-step sequencer where you can sequence the melodies and the rhythms any way you want. And then you just make sure that you don't draw any lines or put any colliding objects underneath the falling sound objects, because that way they just disappear out into nothingness. If you're using the MIDI only plugin, then you don't really need to bother with a mixer because there's nothing to mix. It won't generate any audio. Inside here, we find controls for volume, for pitch, for length, and also for panning, and of course, a master volume control. Next, we have audio effects. And if any of you have ever used any Fingerlab apps before, then you will recognize this interface. You can find it in DM1 or DM10, for instance. So we basically have 4 effect panels, and they can each hold one single effect. And there are different effects to choose from, but there are 2 different types. So this row up here, these are basically send effects. The other ones down here, these are master effects. Now for the send effects, you can actually select what type of sound objects gets affected by the effects in here by basically highlighting them, turning them on or off right here on the sides. You can't do that with the master because that's the master out, so yeah. Now you can turn effects on or off over here, and then you can select the effects right here. We got overdrive, delay, reverb, envelope filter, phaser, formant filter, texturizer, robotizer, and Dalek for the send effects. And for the master effects, we got overdrive, reverb, envelope filter, compressor, and noise gate. So all of the effects has an XY for controlling the parameters within the effect, and then we got a dry wet control. And what's cool with this is that there are actually 2 effect objects in here, but these will only control what's in the send effects. And so FX1 is for this one, and FX2 is for this one. And so let's just put a planet over here and put FX2 here. Then you can see how as that thing orbits, we also get, if we go into effects, an orbit of the control inside the XY pad. It was always going to be a brilliant move adding MIDI to something like Musyc 2. I've never had so much fun working with a MIDI sequencing app like Musyc 2 because it is a creative, physics-based MIDI platform now. And it feels a little bit weird calling it a MIDI sequencer because it wasn't always that, because it used to be something that just produced its own audio and it was very limited on sound kits. But then of course you could import your own samples and make your own sound packs. And it turns out that Musyc 2 has an improved sound engine, so you can import high quality samples. But none of that matters, because why would you even bother with samples? If you just pipe out all of those MIDI notes into any MIDI note receiving instrument, hardware and or software, well, you don't really need to bother with samples. And even if you wanted to bother with samples, it is tedious chore-like work, because you have to record 6 samples, and then when you get into Musyc 2, you have to load them one by one. An improvement would be to allow the user to go into a folder, either multi-select samples or just select a folder, and then if you name it like this, have the program actually recognize that you did this so it knows how to distribute the samples. Why should I sit here loading them one by one? So yeah, that would be an improvement, but then again, I would tell the developer I don't think it's worth it, because why would you want to work with samples when you've got MIDI? Next, I'm going to talk about my wish list. Okay, so I'm going to start out really easy by asking for a way better project browser, and I'll show you why. Here's a collage that I put together out of all of the projects I've made so far. There's 36 of them, but I want you to imagine scrolling through them sideways like this when you have 100 or maybe more. I mean, I really love working with this app, so yeah, I could easily make 200 surfaces in here. What you see here is just the result of me working with this app for a couple of months. And I really think that the browser should look more like my collage than it looks like in the app right now. And don't do the mistake of making a list, because that's just more vertical scrolling instead of horizontal scrolling. And of course, I get why there's scrolling. I'm not saying there shouldn't be any scrolling, but you could at least do rows of like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 projects. Next, I want to talk about some improvements to the drawing and actually our ability to build things in here. Basically, what I'm asking for are some editing tools, because right now we cannot bend lines, and I wish we could do that. I wish also that we could control the thickness of lines. I wish we had a multi-select tool so that we can multi-select stuff and move them around or even delete them. And when it comes to the deleting function or eraser, you press the eraser, and then as soon as you erase something, it turns off the eraser function. And if you want to erase something again, you have to go back and tap the eraser and erase something new. That's horrible. I really wish this was a latching on-off button. So off is off and on is on until I say otherwise. Oh, and yeah, of course, it would be really nice to be able to copy and paste stuff too. Another thing I want is the ability to do more modulation, and I want to be able to modulate the modulators. It would be fun if I could use one of the modulators to control the rate of another modulator. Oh, and please expand on the waveform selection. I want the full stack, baby. Sine, triangle, sawtooth, square, sample and hold, smooth sample and hold, all of it. Next, it would be cool if you could add some octave transpose controls for the sound objects, because the default 3 octaves might not be correct for what we want, because now we got it connected to MIDI. But then again, yeah, the developer would probably say, why don't you just change it in the synth? And that would be a fair point, I guess. But it's just so nice when you're already working inside your most favorite app, wink wink, to not have to switch to another app. Next, I want some control over the direction for the orbiting planet thing, and also for this thing that flings things away, the cross. Just make this control bipolar, so 0 is at the middle, and then pulling this way makes it rotate clockwise and the other way counterclockwise. Now I'm gonna suggest adding another interactive object. How about an anti-sequencer? Like a sequencer that works like this, only it obliterates notes instead. So you could have it shooting a stream of anti-musical notes that just makes things disappear. Kind of like a black hole with a gun that shoots black holes. Next, I want more scales. There's a very limited set of scales, and after a while things start sounding the same. The added MIDI is a great tool. It expands the capabilities of Musyc too, but without the extra scales, it's still a very limited sequencer. So Fingerlab, please, please, please give us more scales. Now, another thing that would open up a whole world of crazy modulation schemes would be to add that MIDI-CC mapping system we find in the standalone version inside of the AUV3 version also, because then we can use other apps to modulate stuff in here. Alright, so I just gave you a long list of things instead of giving you my final thoughts. So here are my final thoughts. I'm sitting here and wondering if the developer is hating me for proposing this long list, because it kind of changes what Musyc is, but at the same time it doesn't, which is why I've been careful with what I've been asking for. I haven't been asking for any changes when it comes to the core aspect of Musyc 2. To me, Musyc 2 is a touch instrument. One of the greatest, actually. I love it so much, and I don't want to mess with the core aspect of it. It is a fun, playful app that is easy to pick up and get going with instantly. And that's the whole point of this thing, to be that intuitive touch instrument. And it really, really comes to its rights when you're using a big screen iPad like I am. But it works just as well on an iPhone too. It's a great app, and I don't want to mess with that concept. So the things I've been asking for are really just expanding on the features already in there and maybe adding a few more objects. Yeah, Fingerlab, I don't want to change the core experience of Musyc 2. I love it the way it is. I just want some more pro features for my MIDI sequencing sessions. And I really hope you keep working on this concept. Thank you for saving Musyc. Thank you for making this. Yeah. To everyone else, thank you so much for watching this video. Go down into the pinned comment and you'll have a link to Musyc 2. And as usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.